Alright, so I'm doing this video a little out of order. You can actually see my desk over here where I was using all these various crayons. Alright, so crayons. Um, just wanted to show a quick intro of like what that could mean and then kind of show you what I'm using for this video. So of course crayons, you have your classic crayons. You could just simply have a 24 pack. I've got some different ones. I have the 64 set. After this, I don't know, I might look into getting a bigger set, but we'll talk a little bit about that as we're going along. There's also like neon crayons you can use, which I think some of these have glitter. These are all Crayola brand. Obviously, you have confetti crayons, which I've used before a few different times, and those are really nice. There's also Colors of the World. So there's all kinds of different ones you can use. They don't obviously have to be Crayola. If your kids have a box of random crayons, use those. This is going to be one of those videos where if you can use what you have and you like using what you have, that's the key piece. Then certainly use that. You don't have to buy any of the things I use in this video. We're going to talk a lot about flexibility while I'm coloring. There's a lot of different options and different ways to do this. So the cool thing about this one, it actually comes with the sharpener. Your typical Crayola crayons. They do not have bold, intense color, but they can. And they don't fill in spaces very well usually, but they do give a nice soft color. They're also good for building texture, which we're going to show. These generally have a waxy top to them. They are not water soluble, meaning you can't put water on them and they're probably not going to move around, at least I don't think they do. That's got something else in it. I think that's just wetting the paper. These are, like I said, most of the time, if you really want to try coloring, if you have kids, or maybe, like I said, you have a random box of crayons in your house, these are what you have. They're, like I said, they're good for textures. They're good for solid pieces of color. Let me look here. We got like a neon blue. One of the things, and I will probably be repeating myself in the video, one of the things I will note in the video is that one of the issues and the reason why I don't buy more of these is that I have a lot of tendonitis in my hands, my arms, having to put heavy pressure using a coloring medium puts a lot of strain on my arms and hands, and I like bold, intense color. So coloring like this is probably how I should color, like a soft, very soft, light coloring with these, but I don't like coloring that way, right? And if I use a lot of heavy pressure, which I don't use super heavy pressure, but I use medium pressure in the video, it does wear and tear on my hands. So I can't use these as often as I can something softer, which I'm going to show you as well. So if you do have similar issues and using something with heavy pressure makes your hands hurt, then I have some possible solutions for you. You may not have these at home, but they are things that you can find fairly inexpensively. So there are your basic crayons. Again, they don't have to be Crayola. I have these little Bambino crayons that I had seen as a recommendation. I tried the black one and I didn't like it, but now that I'm putting this green one down, this is actually not too bad. These are really tiny, small crayons compared to normal Crayola. So, and I think they were more expensive because I had to get them, they're not American made. So I don't think they're necessarily worth, and they're very limited in colors. So like if you're looking for something different, I wouldn't say those are worth the investment just in the like 20 minutes I had with them in this video. So there's your, we're going to be using all these different things today. So crayons, this is the first thing we all think of when we think of crayons. However, for those of us that want to do a little more with our crayons or maybe need something a little softer, there are now gel crayons. And there's different types out there. I will try to list some in the description. This is a very cute set that I think Tammy from Tammy Colors 2 gave me. Relatively inexpensive little set with just your basic like 12 colors. Sometimes they'll have watercolor on them. Most of the time, if they're gel crayons, they are watercolor, water soluble, meaning they will move when you put water on them, but you don't have to use them that way. So there's those. Some of my favorite gel, these are labeled gel sticks, but they're essentially gel crayons. Kingart brand has a really good color variety. I like these a lot. So these are crayons. They are labeled as such. So don't feel like you have to get blocked into just Crayola. The cool thing about gel crayons, and these are why I prefer to use these, is they are versatile, and they are also soft. So you'll see me do this in the video, but we'll go ahead and do it here too. Let's do orange and yellow. So these are cute. They have little cat heads on them. And like I said, I don't know if the dollar store even sells gel crayons at this point. So you could always pick up like a little inexpensive set to try. So these, compared to those, like you lay these down, I'm barely touching this paper. And you see how soft and easy. If you like bold, intense color, if you don't want to put a lot of pressure, maybe you have hand and wrist problems, these are fantastic. You don't have to use a lot of pressure. These are twist up ones. So again, you can have a textured appearance on the paper. This is a normal like cardstock, but you can see just how much bolder that color is compared to like a regular wax crayon. There's a couple different ways you can use these. You can just color as is, like I said, if you want to create texture. You can blend with these, which is really nice, and there's a bunch of different ways you can do that. If you're going to use a dry method, I would say you probably want to build up a couple layers of these. I guess there's some sort of gel that I don't believe these have any sort of wax in them, but be sure, I am not the expert, so definitely look at the ingredients on the box if they're ingredients, what these contain, I guess. Hopefully they're in there. But if you're going to use a dry method of blending, I would really load up on your color like that. Now, quick to the point, need no other materials. You can use your finger and just rub, and it will smooth them out. You can like pull them out away if you want like more subtle color. You can also blend the colors together. It's not an actual perfect science, but if you rub at it enough, you can get there. And again, more color you add, the easier this is. If you have absolutely nothing to work with and you don't mind your hands getting dirty. I usually wind up with my hands being smudgy for various reasons. There's a couple other things. There's all kinds of things people use, like these tiny little stiff brushes, like the stencil brush. I try to use this in the video, and I don't like it very much. I think you would have to put a lot of color down on the paper in order to get this to really, it's like a stencil brush. I didn't particularly like this, but I tried it. Honestly, old school and the easiest thing to have on hand, and you see me use it in the video, is a Q-tip. Would help if I zoomed in a little, huh? So I'll just take the Q-tip and just rub it around. If you feel like you got too much pigment on it, you can always rub it like off on another paper. But you'll see me do this in the video. The paper in the video is a little different too, so I would definitely One thing I would say right from the start, and hopefully I'll remember when I do the voiceover, is definitely if you're using different types of paper can give you varying results, so you may want to test. These don't necessarily bleed through on paper, so if you had like a little test page in a book or the back of a page where it might not bleed through, that might be a good place to test some of these things. But I find the Q-tip works almost just as well. I didn't even load up with as much color on this one. Um, and you can pull color straight off the gel crayon. Like these are soft enough. You could pull the color off and do it that way. If you have really small spaces, or if you just want to do like maybe some shading or shadowing around something, obviously Q-tips can get a little like, because the cotton, sometimes I just pull off the extra when it starts doing that. And then you can also use the little blender sticks, like the little paper blending stumps. Um, there's blender solutions out there you could put on the Q-tip. Like there's all kinds of different ways and stuff you may have. There's little soft makeup brushes. Eyeshadow brush probably would work pretty well. So try some of the different things you have and see how you like them. The other way you can use these might not work as well on here. My favorite way to use these. Though I will say when you dry blend them, you get that really bold, intense color and it stays on the page. Now you may use up the crayons pretty quickly that way, but if you really like bold, intense color that's not like watered down or washed out in any way, that might be the way you like to use them. The other way, watercolor. Couple different ways you can do watercolor. You can have a water brush. I like using the Artisas a lot. These are just my workhorses, but any water brush should work. You can use a regular paintbrush and a cup of water. Hang on, I gotta sneeze. Whew. Um, there are some caveats to the water that I'll mention, but you could use, I mean, you could try, I mean, you could even try if your kid has a little watercolor set and they have like the little kid watercolor brushes that come with that. That with some water may work, but you may need a brush with a little more heft. But again, might as well try it. If you have a little bit, um, if you have some like alcohol markers or water-based markers, you may have like some water-based blender brushes or markers. These are just filled with water, or they're water based. I don't know. There's some other solution in there, probably some type of blending solution, but these are supposed to be blender. They're clear and they're supposed, I didn't clean the tip off of this, but they run clear and these are supposed to be able to blend things together. So you could take them and use them like you would watercolor and go over. Just be sure to clean the tip of them if like you're moving into another color and you don't want, maybe you don't want them to blend together. So you can do that. I find that works well in small spaces and it doesn't introduce a lot of water if you're using thin like copy paper or whatever. The more water you use, the more fragile the paper may become. You can, here's the, I don't have a cup of water, just wetting it enough to activate it. I should have started with the yellow, but this will give you a much more blended, smooth appearance. However, it does desaturate the color, obviously, because it's making it watercolor, so it's going to be more washed out. Um, so that is perfectly fine if you just want to use watercolor on a page. Oftentimes I'll base, when I wet something like this, I'll base it with a really light color, washed out version of a color, and then go back over it with darker shading and like a pencil or a pen or a Crayola crayon. I'll show you that in the video. You can also try, which I didn't try in the video. I wonder what a alcohol blender marker would do. Again, I stress to test these, especially if you have a double-sided coloring book, because I can't guarantee it won't bleed through to the page behind it. This seems to be working pretty well too. So again, if you have blender solutions, um, blender markers, water brushes, a watercolor brush with a cup of water, like there's a lot of things you can use here to activate all these. The possibilities are endless. So you'll see me use two in the video. I'm not going fast enough for this. I'll use these little inexpensive gel crayons, and I also use the Kingarts. Downsides to these can, like I said, unless you activate them with water, they can leave a tacky kind of feel on the paper, and they can be easily smudged if you don't spray them with something or put them like in a clear plastic sheet protector. You can easily smudge them with your hands if they're just left as is on the surface. Once you activate them with water and they dry, they won't do that. But if you take them and like smear them together with your fingers or something like you would with an oil pastel, they can smudge if you happen to accidentally touch the page or something. So either use some sort of clear coat to spray to protect the page once you're done with it, or put them in like a clear plastic sleeve where they won't. And even there you have to be careful because they could still smudge if you like, rub the sheet. But if you absolutely do not want to use a spray, that is an alternative you could use. If you like using these types of things and you want to maybe upgrade to some different colors, I wouldn't, upgrade's not a good term here. If you have the budget and you like using this type of stuff, there are some higher budget options available. I want to kind of show all levels here. These are not have to have. You can achieve what I use these for in the page with gel crayons or watercolor crayons. And these are Distress Oxide crayons. And these come in a whole bunch of little sets. They do not sell the complete set. Don't get me started on that. These are essentially just really, again, really soft crayons. These are not as soft as the gel crayons. You probably could smudge with your finger, but I think you would have to heat it up first. These don't smudge as easily with your finger, but they work very similar to the gel crayons. If I can twist it up, soft, easy to add a lot of color quickly. You can water activate these, or like here with the alcohol marker, they blend together well when you do that. Again, you might be able to use a Q-tip to, geez, these go a little bit goes a long way. The one thing I will say for higher budget items is oftentimes the materials that are being used means you can use less of them and they will go a lot farther. You may have to use up lower budget items more quickly because they don't have as much color output. And so, weigh what's important to you for these. I would say if you're just starting out, try the more inexpensive options. If this is something you think you're going to do long-term, coloring with these types of things, then look, possibly to invest. But again, these work very similar to the gel crayons. They're just not as soft. These also come in some nice kind of different colors. If you're familiar with the Tim Holtz Distress Oxide line, these are the same colors that are currently in that line. You can find these in ink, paint. If you like this color palette, you can find it in a lot of places. And we are also going to use watercolor crayons. Now, these are premium level. However, I'm going to preface this by saying there are inexpensive watercolor crayons out there, which look just like a crayon, but they are water soluble. And I know that there was a brand I had, and I can't think of it. Sergeant Art, I think, has a watercolor crayon set that worked pretty well. I don't have them anymore because I don't use watercolor crayons very often. Most of the time, I'm going to use like the gel sticks. Um, but I do have these. So higher level, high level budget, not budget, high budget crayons. Caran d'Ache has two types. There's the Neocolor ones, which as far as I know are not water soluble, but correct me if I'm wrong. Those are basically really expensive crayons. Like, they're softer, they're probably easier to use. If I use crayons a lot, I would probably invest in those myself. Well, not now, but back when they were at least somewhat in a understandable price range, I would have probably invested in those. However, these are the Neocolor 2s. There are new colors available, but you have to buy, they don't sell them open stock separately, which don't get me started on that. So I'm just sticking with the original, how many colors? Two, I think it's like 80 something colors. So these go on a paper just like a crayon. And then you can use any of the techniques I showed you with activating them with water to get kind of a pastel, not pastel, but like a softer effect with them. Here are the colors. I'm not a huge fan of the colors because oftentimes I need light colors because I'm usually adding something on it. However, if you just want to use these and like not put anything on top of them, these are nice. These are not required. Like I said, they sell watercolor crayons at a varying levels of budget that will do what these do. However, again, a little of these goes a long way, so you might find you're using these less, like these last longer. So it really just comes down to what you're using them for, how often you use them, and whether they fit your budget. So I am going to show activating these with water. I'm also going to show just coloring with them. I don't think I need the Neocolor ones because technically I could just color with these if I really wanted to just use crayons, right? Like, you don't have to activate. They may be water soluble crayons, they may be watercolor crayons, but that doesn't mean you have to activate them with water. You can just use them like regular crayons. They're just softer. All right. I think that is crayons in a nutshell. I spent way too much time on that, but I will go, I'll go a little faster in the video. We'll show some of it and then we'll just bounce around to different things. So you won't see me color the whole picture today, but like in one sitting, but I'll start each section, talk you through it in kind of real time, and then we'll move on to the next piece. So I can keep this maybe under an hour. All right, let's get to the picture. All right, so we are coloring out of Halloween All Year Long by Deborah Muller. I have already, uh, the background image was plain. There wasn't anything there. However, I went in with a ruler. You can kind of see it here. And what turns out to be a graphite pencil and sketched out kind of a brick wall texture. Because right off the bat, I'm going to use Crayola crayons. And one of the reasons I like to use crayons is to create texture. And so I thought these crayons would be a good choice for kind of like an old looking brick wall. It's not going to look super old. Um, but I thought it would be good to create texture. You know, brick kind of has that pitted, not smooth look about it anyway, so I don't have to worry too much about the texture of it. I want it to be kind of gritty looking, um, and I keep using the word texture. Um, and kind of textury. So I sketched, like I said, I used a ruler and like a what turned out to be a graphite pencil. And the reason I figured that out is as I was coloring this, I noticed that the lines were smudging a little where I had done that. Now, if you don't want the lines to smudge, probably just a regular lead pencil might do it too. You might want to use maybe like a regular ballpoint pen or something with a thin line that's not going to smear once it's dried. However, as I was coloring, I kind of grew to like it because again, it lends to that gritty texture. And this is a very soft blue. So the thing with the wax crayons is my poor hand. You can tell where Leroy attacked my hand. I do apologize. My hands aren't the greatest looking. Usually, thanks to the cats. They're on camera an awful lot. I probably should care more about that. But I wish I wrote down all the colors I use because, of course, now I've packed them all up. Anyway, I went with a very light blue because one thing you can do is even with crayons, you can create a little dimension with shading. So I know oftentimes we feel like, oh, we can't do the things that other people can do because maybe I don't have the color pencils that they use or uh, the whatever, I can't do shading, I can't do highlights and things like that because I don't have the things that they're using, and that's not true. And it's one of the reasons I do like doing pages like this where I am coloring with something I don't usually color with because it helps me learn things about those tools. Now, I mentioned in the intro I don't use Crayola crayons not because they're Crayola crayons. I usually don't use them because they don't, as you can see, they're very light. You have to put a lot of pressure down to get pigment on the paper because they're just so heavily wax based. And because my hand wrist tendonitis issues, I can't color with them very long without them affecting my hand. It's one reason I don't use like Crayola colored pencils or very hard colored pencils either, is if it is, I can't color for very long without it causing me a lot of pain. So, but for this background, it was okay to use them for, but you'll see me use a variety of the different types of crayons that I covered in the first part of this video, and I'll show you the ones that I tend to use more. Though I will not, like I said, a crayon is a great way to just quickly put some texture down, like if you want grass or bushes or leaves or anything like that. Now, what I'm doing is, you saw me go over everything with the very light crayon. Now I'm using a very dark, like indigo color, and I'm basically just scribbling around all the lines and around all the objects. This is my quick, this is not how you're supposed to do it, this is how I do it kind of thing. If you really are curious about like creating shadows in right areas, light theory, shadow theory, things like that, there are a lot of videos out there on that, where you should put shading like this, where you should put highlights and things like that. And sometimes I will go to the trouble of doing that because maybe I want to challenge myself a little bit. Most of the time, though, I am just vibing coloring, and I like the look of the dark around the light colors, and so I will just shade around everything. Is not how it would look in natural light, or I guess if there was a light source here, but I like the effect. I like how it looks. It is very easy. I don't have to think about where the light's coming from, how would the shadows show. I can just color it and be happy with it. So that's kind of what I'm doing. I'm going around all the lines in the brick pattern and then just basically around all the parts of the picture. Now, I am going a little fast. I did speed this up, but you can tell I am just very, again, this is the year of vibe coloring for me. I very much just want to get the color down to go to the next thing. And so it may look a little darker in some areas. This is the thing to keep in mind with Crayola crayons and pretty much any crayons, is it's very hard to take back. You can't erase like you can with pencils. um, it's very hard. Once it's on the paper, it's very hard to get it, if not impossible, to get it back off the paper. So if you go too heavy, if you're using water, you can soften it, but because these are wax-based crayons, you're not going to be able, these are wax-based Crayola crayons, you're not going to be able to lighten this up. So you may want to take a little more time if you don't like the smudginess of it. If you want a little more subtle shading and you don't want like some areas where it's not 100% shaded well, or it looks a little smudgy or smeary, I'm perfectly fine with that. It really just comes down to what you are comfortable with and what you like to do. It doesn't have to be perfect. And this is a video that, like any video I ever do, where I will show you I make mistakes, I learn things, I've learned how to cover things up if I don't like them. Most things, with the exception of the crayons I just mentioned, most things, and even them to a point, can be covered up. But if you are worried about adding too much color, you might want to go light first and then go back in and add more color. I don't want to go back over this. So I am just going in here heavy-handed. It is scribbly, but you know what? At the end of the day, the picture turns out fantastic in my opinion, at least for me. And so I just don't stress about it. I'm enjoying doing this. But I don't want to spend 30 minutes on the background. So lastly, if you want a little more, so this is again the beauty of the wax crayons, is you can kind of layer over them and create depth. So here I'm just taking a brown crayon. I think this is one of those Bambino crayons, and I'm just going over the lines in the brick just to make them stand out a little bit more and just introduce a little more darker kind of layer of color. Again, there are a tons of videos out there that go into more detail on color theory. Like here, I could have used a black, a dark gray. You can always use the opposite on the color wheel to create shading, which I need to do more of. So in this case, that would be orange. This brown is kind of close to the orange, so I think that's why it kind of works well. And I just wanted to give it like a little bit more of an aged look. I think my plan was originally to come back in here with some of the gel crayons and maybe create like a little bit of moss and stuff, but man, by the time I get to the end, the picture's so busy and I'm just happy with it. So um the picture may not turn out what you initially expected, and again, that is perfectly fine. um It is, first and foremost, I feel like coloring should be fun. Even if you do it for art, for creativity, for anxiety relief, for stress relief. I mean, at the end of the day, you're not going to want to do it if it's not fun. And so if you feel like you're miserable because you're spending a lot of time on details when you're not a detail person, maybe, and maybe you like details. Some people find like detail work really soothing and they will spend 3 hours on a picture, slowly coloring in the details. And we are all different. That's what I love so much about this hobby. So, find what works for you. But there is our background with crayons. And I really like how it turned out. I definitely want to use these more for quick, large areas. I think they're very handy. I was playing around with the confetti ones and then I thought, nah, next thing up we're going to do is the gel crayons. which I cover in the video. I am doing a voiceover here, obviously, but here are the Kingarts. You'll see me use those, the metallic versions, a little later. I go over this already. I probably could just cut this out. It'll go quick. Anyway, to start with, though, we are going to use the, if it comes around to it, these little Ooly crayons. Like, I think these are the types of crayons you can find like at the dollar store or at Walmart. I'll try to link to these if I can find them. You don't have a ton of color variety, but you can make them work even if you want to do like some blends. I think I was playing around with the green and the brown at one point. You'll see me get, it's this little textured palette, but you can use those cutting boards that have like the textured backing, like the inexpensive ones. You can use them to do the same thing, to kind of play around, like to see what colors would blend together. Like here I'm kind of playing with the green and brown. I ultimately don't use this, but yeah, you can use a cheap cutting board. You don't have to have one of these palettes. Like I said, green and brown doesn't happen, but I do use these for the flames. And so what we're going to do is we're going to put down a solid amount of color, and then we're going to blend it, do a dry blend if we ever get around to it. There we go. All right. And you're not going to be able to see it start. Like in the first half of the video, I am laying these down. They lay down a lot of pigment very quickly. I highly recommend gel crayons if you like using crayons, but you have hand and wrist pain, or you want intense color quickly. I highly recommend gel crayons. You will be able to see the difference in the intensity of color between this and the wax-based ones. And they are more versatile. You can leave them as is. You can blend them with dry mediums or dry thing like Q-tips and stuff, or you can, most of the time they are water soluble. So there's a lot more you can do with these as well. I honestly need to use my gel crayons more often. So this is going to be a dry blend technique. I am really not putting a lot of pressure right here. I wish I could show you like how little pressure I'm putting down. And you can see the pigment difference in these versus like your regular wax-based crayons. So I'm going to do a blend of red, orange, and yellow. This is a fairly easy thing you can do that I feel like gives, again, a little more depth to this. Now, I say all this to say, if you just used, one color of blue on the background, if you use yellow for the flames, and you just colored all this one color, with all with crayons, like all with Crayola crayons, wax based, it will still be a fantastic picture. I'm using all this to show you the variety of things you can use in this one picture, but honestly, if you use Crayola crayons to color the whole picture, it's still fantastic. It doesn't have to use all these different things. I'm just doing this for the sake of this video. But if you enjoy coloring with the Crayola crayons and you like that texture and you like doing, coloring with those, color the whole picture with them. Any coloring is fantastic coloring. It does not have to be blended. It does not have to have different colors. It doesn't have to have shading. This is, again, more of a demo to show you what these can do. And if you are new to coloring and you want to be able to do some of these things, a lot of this are quick and easy ways to be able to do that. Now, one thing, if you are blending, like I'm coming in here with the yellow, I am going over some of the red and orange with it as well to increase the depth of it and cover up. You can see some of the white of the paper coming through, so I'm using it to cover up that white pigment. If you do that, you want to make sure you clean it off before you use it next time, or otherwise you'll have like the orange and yellow on it. But you can see this is, I sped this up, but this was pretty much the quickest thing I did. One of the quickest things I did in this picture were these flames. And you can see, like I said, how intense the color is. And if you have kids, you know, this is fun stuff to do with them too. And they probably would like the gel crayons too. A lot of different ways you can blend these. You can use your fingers. You can use a stencil brush. Yeah, so I'm doing that here. You can try with your finger. It's a little bit of a blunt instrument, so if you're doing these little detailed areas, it can smear things a little bit. I tried a stencil brush. It did not go well. Ultimately, I liked using just plain old Q-tips with this. It blended them out just enough for me. I didn't need it to be absolutely perfect, but it did blend it together. Again, and it works well for tiny detail spots like these flames. Again, you probably should start with light and go to dark. You can tell mine gets a little intense because I went from dark to light. I do that, and I need to be better about that. So you'd probably be better off going from light to dark. However, it was fine. I wasn't stressing about it. Yeah, here's where I tried that stencil brush, and it was really dry. Didn't want to go anywhere. Didn't want to push. You would need probably a lot of layers to really get that, find that more useful. But me, Q-tip, if it starts getting if the cotton starts coming off of it, I just pull the cotton off, and then it still has just enough on it to act as just like a blunt blending tool. Again, you could use probably those little paper stumps would work well for this too. I have some. I like using Q-tips a lot. I use them when I use pastel type pencils too. They just, you can go through a lot of them, and they're relatively inexpensive. I just have to keep them away from my cats. Now, one thing I did realize when I was doing this is it was smudging a little bit around the edges. You can see it there on the right side of the paper, but I realized I liked that. And so I went back in with a yellow and I just scrubbed it around these flames to kind of create like a light source, of course, because you would kind of have glowy yellow light around these flames, like I guess in real life, if this was such a thing. I don't blend them. I don't do anything. I just do them on the paper like this. And I really like this, and I think this is a technique I am going to use for a quick and easy glowing effect on my other pages. So this was something I hadn't tried before, but this was super easy, barely an inconvenience, if you get that reference. And I liked it. It was just a quick effect. And again, I sped this up, but this really didn't take a lot of time. So, okay. What are we doing next? I think we're doing the Distress Oxide crayons next. Yeah. So, I'm going to use these. Again, a very similar technique on the signs here. But instead of blending them with a Q-tip, I am going to use water to blend these. So I have a 3-color blend again. Again, if you just wanted to use one color, it's perfectly fine. I do this just because I like the effect of them. You will also notice that these, like other crayons, don't. I'm scribbling them on the paper and they're leaving a lot of white space, but I'm not pressing down so hard that they're completely covering up all the white. That's absolutely fine. First off, if you just want to do it that way, it's less product used and it's easier on your hands. The effect, again, creates a textured effect. It's fine. But if you're going in with water or like a Q-tip, kind of like we did, that will smooth out some, and you'll see that really happen with these. I didn't have to scribble hardly at all to put pigment down, and you'll see how quickly these smooth out. Again, this is just a kind of a pro of more expensive products, is oftentimes you have to use a lot less and they go a lot further. If I was using a watercolor crayon like a Sargent Art or something here, I might would have to press quite a bit to get enough pigment to have it go down as smoothly as this does. And it may not. It may still have kind of a chalky finish or something to it. But so again, one of those things, if it's expensive but it lasts you a long time and you use it a lot, it might be worth the investment. Just because, especially if it's open stock and you can just buy, like if you run out of a color, um, then you can buy it open stock. So, but you see how quickly those went down. Um, I'm also going to use them on the skulls. This, and I realized I didn't have my always, I'm saying this so late here. I always have a page protecting the coloring page behind this. It doesn't matter if I'm using stuff that I'm confident won't bleed through. But like if I'm using colored pencil and I'm pressing down on the paper, it can cause dents in the page behind it. If I'm using water like I'm using here, it could soak through the page. So always, and I usually just use a piece of cardstock. I always put a blotter page, no matter what I'm using, most of the time, if I remember, between this and the page behind it. So, all right, here we are using the Distress Oxide, uh, maybe. Oh, I think I'm hunting for something here. Oh, I was looking for the black one, the black Distress crayon. So here I'm scribbling heavier than I was on the signs because I'm going to blend these out with a Q-tip. I'm going to do a dry blend. And so one thing I like about the Distress Oxides is they do have kind of that, a lot of colors that are kind of distressed, if you will. Like this kind of, I think this is old paper. And then they have colors that are more maybe neutral, maybe more antique-y feeling. But I tend to be a bright, bold color kind of person. So unless I'm in a situation like this where I need some more natural colors for like skulls or skulls, that feels so dark. Um, then I like reaching for them. But most of the time I'm a bright and bold color kind of gal, like with the flames. So I don't typically need them very often. These do, at least in my experience on here, I didn't find these blended well with my finger. So I took a dry Q-tip and they blended well. I don't think they were as smooth as the gel crayons, but they do blend well together enough. If you do find you're having trouble with stuff blending together with like a Q-tip, what I would do, and I think I did it with the black shading on the eyes, is take like just a tiny little drop of water, maybe just the tiniest little drop. I actually use too much on the end of your Q-tip, like just enough to slightly wet it. And that should soften them up enough to allow them to blend out smoother. I use a little too much water, but I didn't mind. It didn't have to be solid black. Like they wouldn't be solid black just sitting there. So a lot of bouncing around here. All right, now we're using those Caran d'Ache Neocolor 2 aquarelles. There are Neocolor ones. I do not have those. I do believe those are not water soluble. I don't know if they're in the exact same colors or really anything about them. So may have to look for other pages with those. But the Neocolor 2s I end up using here dry and water activated. I like these. A lot of people love these. They are not, I tend to go more for the gel sticks or just regular watercolors or watercolor pencils if I need a water activated medium. I don't typically go for these. I feel like they should have, they're a little pastel-y, like when they get activated, they're really light, and I see people use them in backgrounds and they use them as a base, then go over them with pencil all the way around, and like instead of just shading. And I feel like if I'm going to do that, I might as well just use the pencils, right? Like it just feels, I don't know. I want a more intense payout unless I'm in like in this situation basing with them and then going over them with some shading in crayon or pencil or what have you. Then I don't mind using them. I'll use them more often, but do I think they're worth the price? No. I there are a lot of inexpensive. These are watercolor crayons. That's what they are. There are a lot of inexpensive watercolor crayon options out there. Oh, okay. Yeah, I clipped out that part. So we just finished that and now I'm activating these with water. Again, you can use a water-based like water blender. Like you have the alcohol blender markers that are clear. You can use those like we used in the intro. You can use the water-based blenders. You can use a blending solution with your water brushes. You can use just a regular paintbrush and a cup of water. I the These give me just a little bit amount of water, um, just the amount I need. Now, a note of caution on using water. And this is an Amazon printed book, and you can tell those when you get them, obviously from Amazon. If you go to the last page and look at the back, there will be like the back of the last page in the book, it'll say made in wherever you live. It'll give a location and a date it was printed. That is a good signal that it was an Amazon printed book. You can usually look at and it'll say independently published or something like that in the description. So Amazon paper is better than like copy paper, but not by much. It has definitely gotten worse over the years. And there's some books I have like this that are a couple years old that probably do better than if you got a printed version now. People really do not like using water most of the time on Amazon paper because A, the paper can get very crinkly. B, you can't use a lot of water because the paper is very thin. And even if you let it fully dry, it is still a little bit fragile. So if you want to go over it with a lot of heavy pressure, it can rip the paper. Here you're seeing me use that water blender. This is a Tombow, but there's all kinds of different water-based blender markers, water water-based markers, but they're blenders, so they're clear. And you can see this works just as well. What I do with Amazon paper, like here, is I try to activate with as little water as possible. Most of the time it means I try to use stuff that's going to activate with just a little bit of water, instead of me needing to oversaturate the page. Neocolor 2s are good for that. The gel sticks I have are good for that. So, but both the water brush and like the water-based marker introduces a little bit of water rather than a lot. So that is the one note of caution I would have in regards to using water on Amazon paper. I do it all the time. And there's also ways you can treat the paper and create a barrier so that you can use a lot of water, but that's for another video for another day. Here I'm showing some of the different ways you can use like the Kingart gel sticks or any gel crayons. You can take the pigment directly off the crayon with the brush like I'm doing here. That also allows you to create a base in like a small area like this without having to worry. Because the gel sticks are a little blunt and they cover a large area, it can be hard to get into detailed areas like this. Without going outside the lines a little bit, and you'll see me do that with the purples here. This is a metallic purple. You can see me putting it here to show you could create that shading we did with the really dark blue crayon on the brick. You could technically use these gel crayons and use the Q-tip or some sort of blending tool to create that. where you just saw me do that purple shading. Uh, Sometimes I like to do that with like pastel pencils. It's a little time consuming, so I prefer the method I use, but it is something you can do. And that's the beauty of these in particular, like the gel crayons, is really truly they are probably the most versatile of all the crayons I'm showing you today. You can use you can put them down straight on the paper like this to create like bold intense color. You can blend them with dry tools, you can wet them, you can take a dry tool, pull pigment off the crayon and create subtle shading. You can mush them together to make them blend. You don't really have to use the Q-tip. I'm kind of doing that here, but I still go over with the Q-tip a little bit, just to make it a little bit better of a blend. Um, yeah, they're probably the most versatile of all the types of crayons, and they all have crayons on them. Um, they're probably the most versatile type of crayon I can show you. So like if you want something that isn't just regular Crayola crayons, and wax-based crayons are great, but you can create texture with them, you can create like depth and shading, but there's not much you can do with them. Like they won't activate with water. You put a Q-tip over them, they're not going to move around much. If you want something that allows you a little more movement on the page, I think out of all the things I show you today, the gel crayons are probably your most versatile for both dry blending or just putting down on paper, and then being able to blend it in different ways. But the cool thing was, as I was doing this page, my brain was just lighting up with like all the possibilities. You could do all of these things I'm showing you today. You could do in all kinds of different ways. You could activate a lot of stuff with water. You could use you could use an alcohol, a clear alcohol blender marker if it's a one-sided page. I wouldn't do that if it's a double-sided page. Now, here's another lesson if you're just starting out in coloring or if you've been around for a while. If you notice the tail is a little smudgy because of all the gel crayon that kind of mushed over into it, and again, it's really hard to take crayon off the page. It's better to add slowly, or I guess be more careful, unlike me. But when in doubt, if you don't like it, when in doubt, black it out. I also realized I didn't have a lot of black, darker color on this page. And so I thought I would introduce that. There's a lot of ways you can do this. I'm using a Faber-Castell Pitt pen, which is India ink. So it's waterproof. So if I were to go back over this with like, not that I'm going to do it, but if I were to go back over this with a water brush, it shouldn't move. But you can see I'm adding a little more of this copper color to the trident. But you can use a Pitt pen. You could use a ballpoint ink pen. You could use a black marker, alcohol marker. You could use a black water-based marker. There's so many different types of tools. You could use a black gel pen. There's so many different types of tools you can use. The only thing I would say is some of the results may vary if you're going over wax, like the crayons. If you're going over the gel crayons or the wax crayons, sometimes stuff doesn't want to go on very smoothly. It might skip a little. So oftentimes you may want to do that before you add you may want to do that and then not add the stuff underneath that's going to complicate it. But if you're trying to cover things up, kind of like I'm doing, you're not thinking that far ahead. Here I'm using a crayon instead of the Pitt pen for the hair. I wanted a little more dark kind of elements in the page. And I want to add some crayon. So her hair has been activated through the water color crayon, and so it is a smooth base, but I want to go back over it with some crayon to add a little texture. And because she has the black tail, I thought it would be cool to kind of alternate her hair strands and have some of them be black as well to just balance out the page a little bit. I didn't like this Bambino black crayon. I felt like it wasn't um, dark enough. I actually go back over it with the Crayola one later, and oddly enough, the Crayola one did better than this one did. Plus, this is a really small crayon, and y'all know like how quickly I try to color, and so it took me a little longer, and I was getting frustrated by it. But like I said, this here, you could use a black alcohol marker. You don't have to stick to just crayons. You could use a black gel crayon. You could use a black aquarelle dry if you wanted. You could use acrylic paint. You could use an acrylic paint pen. You could again use like an black ink pen or gel pen. Again, this is one of those things where you can introduce these elements and do these different things on the page, and you don't necessarily have to have the exact tools. You don't have to have a black pit pen. You can find other things that will work just as well. You can use crayons. You can use something different. It just it's whatever you have on hand, what you like to use, and you don't necessarily have to run out and buy a bunch of different things to do all the different things I'm doing in this picture. The versatility and the possibilities are kind of endless here. There's so many different ways you could do this picture. Using water, using dry blend methods, using just wax-based crayons, introducing elements like glitter gel pens or white gel pens, or, you know, or you can just, color it all with Crayola crayons, and it'll still look just as great as if you use a lot of different techniques. So I just used a black marker for that, alcohol marker to black in her eyes. I just, in small areas like that, I generally tend to go for something that's going to cover up the crayon pretty good. So, all right, here I try a few things. I should have went lighter on her skin tone. Oh, I'm actually going in over the hair. It's a little hard to see on here, but it is darker than. Again, I think I went too dark on the Neocolor 2s. I should have went with a lighter color so that the shading over the top was more visible. That's a rookie mistake I make. Even now, 7 years later, I still do that. But you can see it. It's there. It still looks good to me. And so here, I'm just going over it with a Crayola crayon. So I try to do the same with her skin, but I don't have enough color variety. I didn't have a dark enough green for the Crayola crayon. Like, I go over it, but I'm not happy with how dark it is. I tried using these neons, and it wasn't really, like, you can hardly see it. So I tried a couple different greens, and I really didn't like, I wasn't getting a dark enough green for my satisfaction. So I end up going back to the Caran d'Ache Neocolor 2s, and I find an olive in there that I just use dry over. This one you can see a little bit, but it wasn't enough for me. It probably would have been just fine leaving it like that, but I wanted something a little more. And you'll see me use this. Man, I could have cut this part of the picture out, couldn't I? Or this part of the video. But I end up going over with this, and I decide I don't like it. Again, just going around all the edges. I'm not worried about where the light's coming from. I just want that effect. So, just quick scribble.
Like I said, some people find it really soothing to just sit here and spend 3 hours doing this type of shading. And that's fantastic. You know, it is whatever makes you happy ultimately. You may not want to do any shading at all. You may decide that her skin as it was exactly what you want and you want to move on to something else. And that's great too. We all don't feel like you have to do something just because somebody else is doing it if you don't enjoy doing that. So, um, here I come back with that Caran d'Ache I was telling y'all about. It is an olive color. My crayons were limited in the 60 set. I wanted something a little darker, so I go in with the olive. It is super, it is not as shaded and soft as I wanted it. I'm also going fast because I'm impatient. Because if I, it's like once I do 1 or 2 layers, y'all, I am ready to be done. It's not as blended as I wanted it to be. I do try a Q-tip with the Caran d'Ache Neocolor 2s. And it does soften it ever so slightly. It does pick it up. So I don't know what the Caran d'Aches are made up of, but I do know that they will ever so slightly, and probably if you put more pigment on the page, you see it, they will ever so slightly blend out a little bit with like a Q-tip. And it was just softened it just enough to make me happy. And I didn't know until I tried it. So that's where I was saying. And here with her top, I ended up using like a fire brick color for the shading, which I thought would look really weird, but it actually looks. That's exactly the difference in color I wanted. So I was like, hey, that works. You might want to be a little more cautious than me because, like I said, once you put this crayon down, you can't really take it back off. But if you didn't like how it turned out, you could always just use black marker or something over the top and the shoes and just black it out. So I would say, be cautious, but I wouldn't be like overly nervous to do anything because there's always ways you can cover things up. And so here I think I added in just a little bit of gel pen there. I come back in, add just a little more orange to her eyes. Just playing around with some shading. I'm trying to see. Hopefully that I do. Okay. So here's where I go in with this Q-tip. And again, y'all may not even be able to see the difference, but I saw a difference. And so for me, it was good enough. And if you don't like this type of texture shading, you could always come back in and put another layer of water over this to kind of blend it out with the layer underneath. Again, I would be cautious doing that a lot of layers on a thin paper like Amazon paper, but it can be done as long as you're careful and you give it plenty of time to fully dry in between. When I added the stuff on top of where I activated with water, I gave it time to fully dry and the paper to try to at least go back to it is a little fragile already, but sometimes you can use a heat gun. Sometimes I've just let it sit and dry for like 24 hours before I touch it again. Here is the finished picture. Sorry for it's a little bit of a glare because of the light. I did wet a Q-tip ever so slightly and go over the dark shading I did on her skin just to lighten it just a touch because it was a little too harsh for me. Again, one of the advantages of using it like a watercolor type crayon over the top to shade dry is you can always, slightly wet it to, make it a little less harsh if that's what you're looking for. So here is the finished picture. I added a little bit of white gel pen in there. White gel pen can be kind of weird over gel crayons, so you could use white acrylic paint. Like sometimes it can get kind of skippy because if you're using like a white gel pen or a black gel pen and it hits the gel crayon can clog it up a bit. Also, wax-based crayons could do that. So you can see like down around the bottom where it gets a little skippy. You can use whiteout. You don't even have to have acrylic paint. I think whiteout would work if you just wanted like the little, just little highlights on the page. Um, so yeah, I honestly was really, I had a lot of fun with this, a lot of fun using the different tools. I wouldn't necessarily use so many different techniques on one page, but for the purposes of this video, I thought this was a good one to do it with. And there are definitely things that I will use all of these in the future more, I hope. And there were a lot of things I learned doing it. So hopefully you had fun with it. Hopefully this inspires a little bit with, you know, seeing what you have at home that you can use. If you do want to purchase things, there are always lower budget options. There's a lot of versatility with things. But at the end of the day, I think the lesson is don't feel like you can't do, you know, you can't shade or blend or do things like that because you don't have pencils or certain types of mediums. And also, the important thing is don't use things, you don't have to use things just because other people are using them, especially if you don't like using them. Try, you know, what you have at home. If you like it, great. If not, there are other options out there. Um, and hopefully you enjoyed this video, and at some point in the future I will be back with another, we might try water-based markers next, which should be interesting. So thanks and bye for now.